Hello everyone, this is Unit 9. Crisis Communication is field of research and practice by Ася Bigbalatova. In the following, I will cover topics of crisis and crisis situation. I will also speak about crisis management and crisis preparedness. Then it will be two topics of narrow and broad perspectives on crisis, and the last would be state approach. So what is crisis? Crisis can be identified as situations which require an emergency response from public organizations. This could be major accidents, natural disaster, or any criminal activity. For example, act of terrorism or school shootings. Therefore, crisis can be divided into intentional and unintentional events. And intentional crisis is any sort of terrorism, sabotage, or workplace violence, unethical leadership, and unintentional crisis, natural disaster, disease outbreaks, product failure, and economic downturns. The study of crisis management originated with several large-scale industrial and environmental disasters in the 80s. As an example, famous Chernobyl product tampering case and environmental crisis after the Exxon oil split become the subject of crisis management and communication. So crisis management is conceptualization, implementation, maintenance, and activation of the crisis preparedness system of a private or public organization. In detail, it means that organizational resources are allocated or are organized in a way that they can identify a crisis building up, prevent crisis from breaking down, be prepared to handle it and bring the crisis to an end, rescue, reduce the damage caused by the crisis to organization or industry, or external and internal stakeholders, and last, to learn from the crisis. Talking about crisis preparedness, the system very much inspired by strategic management. Therefore, crisis preparedness of organization aiming to build on a crisis mindset among the employees and in particular crisis group. In detail, it means that not only the crisis management team should be prepared to face the crisis, but also the employee and CEO. Everyone should be informed about the scope and the nature of the crisis preparedness in their organization. Also, all the promises made by the company towards their customers and stakeholders must be integrated to their policy, and crisis preparedness must be a part of written values. Crisis preparedness should be defined as a specific function that anchored, integrated, and develops continually. The field of crisis management and communication is presented by narrow and broad perspectives. The narrow perspective originated from the military idea of command and control. Within this perspective, crisis seen as sudden and isolated event. Usually it's accidents like fires, floods, or any kind of natural disaster. Crisis handled reactively only when a crisis happens. Crisis management reactive and focus on tactics, command and control, which is developed from C2 command control to C4 command control, communication and intelligence. Crisis communication focus on instructions. The key actors here are citizens and public emergency response organizations. This perspective is based on functionalist communication theory. From this standpoint, crisis is seen as something negative, and the actions need to be taken to regain control and turn businesses into normal state as soon as possible. Since the 80s, discipline developed from a narrow to a broad perspective. Broad perspective is a dominant perspective today. Crisis is seen as dynamic process. Crisis management is proactive and focuses on strategy, organizational preparedness, and opportunity management. Also, from this perspective, crisis is seen as something that can contribute to positive thinking and what can make an organization stronger. The key actors here are private companies and stakeholders. Crisis communication here is no longer a matter of instructions and information. It's focused on symbolic and social capital, like stakeholders, for example. Any public or private company that is facing the crisis can possibly lost the trust among their stakeholders, like among their employees or customers. And therefore, broad perspective suggests communication approach that protect and repair organizational trust, credibility, and reputation. Within the broad perspectives on crisis management, both scholars and companies apply staged approach. Crisis seen here as process that has a life cycle and it's divided into several stages, which has its own discipline and tools. A stage approach was first introduced by Fink in 1986. In his Anatomy of the Crisis, he suggested a four-stage model with the prodromal, acute, chronic, and crisis resolution. Later comes in 1999, suggested the most influential three-stage approach. In the core of this model is three phases: pre-crisis, crisis, and post-crisis. The first phase is pre-crisis stage, can be described as you don't know when the crisis will happen, you don't know that it will, and you can be prepared. So at this stage, the main focus is on preventing a crisis from breaking out and preparing the organization to handle the crisis. One of the biggest challenges here is to recognize the crisis at early stage. That it calls signal detection and activate the crisis preparedness of organization. The actions that are taking at this stage, creating crisis teams and generating crisis management plan. Talking about crisis management plan, it's a set of instructions which with detailed information on how people should think, act, and communicate when a crisis happens. The plan identify who will take action and what their roles will be. Next stage is crisis such. This is the time when a crisis hits organization. The focus is here on coordination and damage management. At this stage, the most important aspects are crisis decision making and crisis communication plan. So crisis decision making is a discipline that covers by theories based on rational analytical approach to decision making. According to these theories, decision making is purely cognitive activity where rational human beings first calculate all the possible solutions to the problems, and next they identify the consequences for each of these solutions and finally make a decision. Another theoretical tradition that covers crisis decision making emerged in the mid of 80s was based on naturalistic decision making. One of the earliest approaches was recognition prime decision model by Klein. This model shows how people make quick and effective decisions when they are face complex situation. The model works well in conditions of time pressure, incomplete information. It's highly relevant, for example, for emergency services, like rescue units, police. Um, Talking about crisis communication plan, it is a communication model, and the main focus here is on communicating with stakeholders when the organization must communicate through words or actions. For example, if crisis affects public health or safety, then an official spokesperson would make a public statement as quick as possible. And it covers questions like who is the sender, who is the receiver, what is the key message, and what is overall communication strategy, of what channels will be used. And we come to the last stage, which is post-crisis. This stage is not researched very well. It seems that scholars do not find it attractive as the other two stages. But but it's an important stage. And in terms of helping our organization to get rid of the crisis and learn from it. Disciplines that covers this stage are organizational learning, opportunity management, and change management. One of the important aspects of the post-crisis stage is evaluation. It is a process of information collection about what happened during the crisis and registering all the events. Basically, it's a investigation to gain knowledge, to understand the consequences of the crisis. For example, Combs suggested that post-crisis communication can be used to repair the reputation of the organization and prevent reputational damage. It's important to stress that all stages of a crisis, at all stages of the crisis, it's important to remember that communicating with internal and external stakeholders is critical. And here we come to an end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you very much.